Hello, and thank you to Heritage Landscape Supply for this opportunity to provide this presentation today. I'm going to be speaking about wood destroying insects, subterranean termites in particular, and my title is the top 10 actions that we can do to have quality termite treatments. My contact information is there. My name is Dr. Bob Davis, Technical Services Representative with BASF, based out of Texas, South Central US. That's my email, that's my cell phone. If I can be of service, please reach out. My compadre, Richard Warner, is the strategic accounts representative for Heritage Landscape Supply. And there's Richard's email and as well as his telephone. So if we can ever be of service, please reach out and we're happy to help. And thank you to Heritage Landscape Supply for having this workshop today. And it's certainly a pleasure to be part of that. So let's get into the top 10 and see what we're talking about. So I'll talk about the top 10 actions I think are critical for pest management professionals to provide a great treatment. You can see we'll talk about liquids, a little bit of baiting, pre and post treatments, maybe have some examples. And at the end, we'll have a little bit of a quiz. I think most of us agree that it's very, there's a lot of elements that go into providing a fantastic termite service, right? And there's a lot of training that goes on. Is it rocket science? Well, the answer is no, of course, but there's a lot of rocket scientists in Houston, Texas that can't do termite work, right? Because they're not trained properly. And we that are trained, we have this special information. We know about the animals, we know about termites, we know about building construction. We know about the labels and the tools and conducive conditions and how to do those applications and how to do those great inspections. And that's all part of it. There's a lot here, but part of it is, the training that we're doing today. And as you do in your own companies and you're out in the field every day, learning all the time. And that's an important part of it. So a successful part of this is getting this knowledge down, getting these techniques through. So some of you are saying, well, what's the top 10, right? Well, okay, what is the top 10? Well, here's my top 10. Number one, you have to have a great inspection on the front end. Then we have to have really good paperwork and documentation. And then you're going to select your control materials and your treatment materials. And with those, you're going to do measuring and mixing and calibration, and you're going to know those labels for those products inside and out so you can do the applications correctly. And then if you're using a liquid system, then, you want to apply per a system, right? And we'll talk about that. And then termite baits are fantastic tools. And there's ways to use termite baits and in conjunction with the liquids, so you have very powerful approaches. And then you have to service these systems over time. It could be a termite bait system, but also post-treatment inspections for both liquids and baits are really, really critical for you to provide great service to your customer. So that's my top 10. You may have some other things that kind of fit within this, and I certainly do understand that, but I'm going to focus on these today. So what's number one? I think I mentioned front-end inspection, and that's really critical. I think most of us agree with that top statement. Termites are some of the most destructive insects in the world. Well, yeah, they are, but they're also very beneficial because they help recycle material back into the soil for regrowth. We just don't need them to recycle our customers', homes today, right? Give them a little bit of time. Now, we've got some estimates out there from past surveys as to how much it costs per year in the United States alone regarding termite services, termite damage repair. And, it's $6 to $7 billion per year. And this is pre-COVID dollars, right? So we all know what's happened with cost of materials and everything since COVID, right? We're up, 30–40% in many aspects. So you can do the math and you can see it's, the services that we're provided are really critical in protecting the real wealth of our customers. And of course, when things kind of go wrong, we can end up in an insurance or a legal situation. So we want to do things in a fantastic way because we take care of our customers, but also sidestep any kind of liability. Well, one way we can do this is have a great inspection, do this on the front end. This gentleman, Joseph, in 1996, I know it's been a while ago, but he went and worked with Orkin, and they looked at all their termite branches across the United States, and they went and they mined their data to find out what was the number one reason they had to go back on a retreatment. And they determined the number one reason is they missed something on the front end inspection, right? So we need to do a great job. Like this guy here, he's finding that termite up in that attic. Hopefully he doesn't miss that one, right? So part of that inspection is we have to know the animals, right? And you have to know your insects, whether it's Bob or Linda or Don or whatever, right? Got to love these Far Side cartoons. But here's a video running of some drywood termites. Now we're going to spend most of our time here talking about subterranean, but many of us run across drywood termites also, and they have a different type of damage, right? They don't have the shelter material in there that we see, and certainly their fecal pellets, like we see in the upper right, and even in this video, you can see some of the fecal pellets are very diagnostic that you have drywood termites. They do not live in the soil. They live in the wood itself, and that's where they get their food, and that's where they get their moisture. So when we find them, we can do directed treatments right to them and take care of them, but we have to find them. Powder post beetles. Many of us will run across different situations of beetles. Sometimes it's in the actual structural timber. Sometimes it's in the rafters. Sometimes it's in the furniture and picture frames, whatever. But when you find these, of course, you're going to see usually some type of fine or coarse powdery frass, and you're going to see some emergence holes. And there's some information out there, like from Dr. Potter from the University of Kentucky here, that can help us with identification and even some treatment options. And of course, many of us run across carpenter ants, and we do a lot of carpenter ant services throughout the years. And they can also be, destructive wood destroying insects. And we're looking for that frass, like we see in this bottom picture here. And when they kick that out of the walls or out of the voids onto the floor, it's our garbage pile that tells us, hey, we got a carpenter ant infestation. When we find the damage, like in this video, you can see how it's a smooth sandpaper type finish to it, right? Certainly we can find the ants also. But these will be some different types of wood destroying insects that we might run into. And of course, we're the professionals. We have to know the difference between termites and ants. If you want to take a picture of these next 3 slides, please do. If you want to take a picture of any slides in here, please do for saving. But there's a couple I'm going to point out. And many of you are going to train new hires, right? So these next 3 slides could help with your training of new personnel. Okay, first of all, when you look at that an ant or that versus that termite, let's take a look at the antennae. If you look here on the left, we got this female carpenter ant. Notice has one very long segment and then a series of elongated segments after a 90-degree turn. We call that geniculated or elbowed antennae. We know that that's the kind of antennae that ants will have. Termites, you can see this worker termite here on your right, it's a straight moniliform or beaded antennae. They're not elongated and they do not have an elbow or geniculate bend, right? So we see this straight beaded antennae. So that's a great characteristic to look for. Now they're both insects, but we can look at their body shape, right? Insects have a head region, a thoracic region, and an abdominal region. So let's take a look at this female carpenter ant on the left again. We have the head region, the thoracic region, and then we have this pedicel here that's part of the abdominal region with this enlarged gaster. When we see this very strong constriction, we know it's not a termite. It's going to be an ant or possibly a wasp. Now, if you come over here, look at this termite, you have a head region and then a narrowed thorax or thoracic region, and then an enlarged abdominal region. It looks like a bowling pin, right? So very much different from what we see with the ant. And then, of course, the third thing is when we do have swarm events, then we have what we call alates. Alates have the wings attached to them. When they drop their wings, they de-alate, right? They become de-alates. So on the left-hand side here, you can see this carpenter ant, big old female carpenter ant. It has 2 wings, 2 pairs of wings, 4 wings total, but the front wing is much larger than the hind wing. You can even see that hind wing through that translucent membrane. So when we see 2 different sizes of wings, we know it's not a termite. Over here on the right-hand side, these swarmers got caught in this webbing, which is a great inspection technique when you have cobwebbing and stuff in a home. Look at the webbing. But notice there's 2 pairs of wings, 4 wings total, but they're all the same shape, same size. So definitely you can use that information when you're talking to potential customers or your customers, and certainly with new hires. We're the pros, we're the experts. We need to know this. We also need to know what the damage looks like for subterranean termites. And I'll spend the rest of the talk on subterranean termites. This here is really indicative of what we're looking for. Notice how they're eating the cellulose that's in between the grain of the wood. They've left the grain behind. That's the lignin. They don't eat the lignin. And then they've put shelter material. We call it termite mud. It's really not muddy, right? But it's shelter material that protects them. So when you see this type of damage, probe it with your penknife, probe it with your screwdriver. But when you see certainly that shelter material and eating on the grain of the wood, it is subterranean termite damage. And of course, many times we'll find termites in there at that inspection. Okay, so that's a lot of inspection, very critical. Part of that's now we're going to lead into the paperwork and the documentation, the diagrams. Really, really important part. Remember, everything you do is a legal document, and it can help you in a court of law or hurt you in a court of law if you don't do a very good job. But most importantly, it's a communication piece between you and your potential customer, and maybe you and folks in your company as to who's going to do the treatment or whatever it might be. And today, with our smartphones and digital cameras and such, we can back these up quite readily. And now we got programs that we can use to even help us with these diagrams, right? So do a great job. I mean, one of my hardest things is trying to keep it clean and legible, especially when it's sweaty and you're out working on paper in the middle of the summer, that type of thing. But I suggest your diagram should have the following. And these are some of the diagrams I created. I like to use colors to show some of my pictures where, maybe where my bait systems are, or where my bait stations are, or where the trench treatments might be, that type of thing. I'm certainly going to put down an outline of the structures. I'm going to have some type of linear footage associated with it. I'm going to point out where the activity is, damage, signs of old treatments, conducive conditions, very critical, expansion joints, wells on site, great plumbing penetrations, those type of things. Many of you have paperwork, maybe it's dictated by your state, maybe it's set up by your company, where you have something like I'm showing here at the bottom, right? We have kind of a checkoff list. And these are conducive conditions that are common, right? Wood to soil contact, most common conducive condition we can run across, very, very important. But there's others too that we might see that then we can document on the paperwork and specify. You can add a piece of paper to this. You can put pictures to it. You can show past treatments and suspected treatments. And most importantly, you can use this paperwork with a potential customer to let them know this is what we're going to do for treatment, right? Very important communication piece. Number 3, okay, what's our selection of materials? We're in an exciting time of pest management, right? We have a lot of tools we can use, and Heritage has all these tools available for you to utilize. But, are you doing pre-treatments? Are you doing post-construction treatments? I'm a firm, strong believer in using the non-repellent chemistries. Do the repellent chemistries work? Certainly they do. They just work differently, right? But the bait systems we have, the Chelona system, the Centricon systems, very good systems that are out there, and Heritage has the Chelona available for you. Direct wood treatments, and you can combine a lot of these things, baits and liquids and stuff too. We'll talk about that. And then, when I started as a technician back in the 80s, right, we were doing termite work, and I would do what we call quote unquote full conventional treatments. Meaning we treated everything the label allowed. But now with Termitor and how powerful that is, we can basically treat the perimeter and anywhere there's activity and still get less than 1% retreatment rate. So a fantastic opportunity for you. Follow your labels and follow the minimum standards of your state. So here's one of those slides I'd say if you want to take a picture of, please do. If you know this slide, Termitor, you know how it works. It's non-repellent, undetectable, cannot be detected by the termites, the carpenter ants, whatever that you're treating for. And it's slower acting. It doesn't kick in right away like many of our repellents do or our older chemistries. It allows the termites to do their normal behaviors for hours to a couple of days post-exposure to the treatment, which means they can transfer it. And we've seen it transfer secondarily, tertiary. I've even seen it to the 4th level within that transfer effect. It works very well when they ingest it. Well, it's not a bait. How do they ingest it? Well, they're grooming, they're cleaning, they're using their mouth parts to move treated soil, and they're ingesting. And you've probably seen this byline. We've had this for over 20 years now, 100% control in 3 months or less. Does it take 3 months? Not at all. In fact, we see control starting to happen within hours to a couple of days post-treatment. It stops the damage quickly. Why do we say this? Because when we did all of our initial treatments or we treated structures that had activity, we came back at 3 months for our first inspection. So that was our data point that time. Very good residual efficacy. I feel extremely confident about 10 years of active control in open soil treatments around structures. Now, if the soil moves, that's different. But I feel very good about 10 years. Underneath the slab, when you down drill, I feel very good about 20 years more. And these last 3 things I've talked, very critical for a fantastic termite control material. It does not move. It will not leach. When you put it to the soil, it binds tightly, and the water percolates through that. It will not move it. Now, if you have erosion and the soil moves, that's different. That's part of your inspection process to catch that. And this is a pure water-based material. So it has no odor and no oils, no distillates. It has no odor associated with it. Now, some of you out there said, "Hey, I've used this stuff and I'm applying it in the middle of July and it's hot out there and it's stinky." Okay. That's because your tank needs cleaned, right? It's not the material. It's just that your tank stinks, right? So Heritage's got some cleaning materials they can take care of you on that. And last thing, it doesn't burn plants. It is not herbicidal. So it's a great, fantastic tool. And we'll talk about this full conventional versus perimeter treatments. Very, very good approach you can use. So hope that helps. Okay, so measuring and mixing. We're the professionals, right? Most of the chemistries that are out there, not all of them, but most of them, somebody can go to Ace Hardware or Home Depot or whatever, and they can buy stuff, right? But they don't know how to do it. And that's the difference between the professional and a do-it-yourselfer. And this is where it really kicks in. We know how to put the right amount of chemistry and the right amount of water to do the treatment properly. And we know how to mix it so the first drop and last drop and everything in between is the same concentration. That's part of being the professionals. We need to focus on that. We're going to use dedicated equipment. If you're using non-repellent chemistries, don't mix it with repellent chemistries to lose that power, right? So use some dedicated equipment. Measure carefully, have the right amount of water in your tank, add the right amount of chemistry, mix it up well so it's very homogeneous. Use backflow preventers, or an air gap is fantastic. They're required by the labels, so make sure you do that. If the material sits in the tank, like you mix up Termitor on Friday, and rain starts, so you can't do it till Monday or Tuesday. Is the material still good? Well, of course it is, but you do want to re-agitate it prior to treatment. Okay, so there's two things you can do, right? You can either go to Bob Davis's house and do a treatment, and you can show up empty and fill up at my house. And if you do, and many of us do that, and the labels are fine with that. Here's my suggestion on how to do this well. When you get to my house, you go ahead and throw some water in the tank. Then you add Termitor or your liquid material to the water. And then let's say this is a 100-gallon tank. And if you're at my house, on a good day, you're going to get 5 gallons per minute. Okay. Well, if you got a 100-gallon tank, that's 20 minutes to fill this tank. Well, let's say I put in 5 minutes of water, then I add Termitor. So I got a good 15 minutes where I can put my hose in here. I can use the bypass and the agitation. And by the time I'm full, I am mixed, right? Everything is mixed up evenly within that tank, and I can go ahead and do my treatment. Now, many of you say, I don't do that. I like to load up at the office and then drive to this Bob Davis's house and do the treatment. And that's fine too. The labels support both ways. What I would say is try to show up with water only, because if you have that wreck on the interstate on the way, you can tell the state patrolman, this is just water, it's not pesticide. They won't believe you, but you can tell them, right? But then when you get to my house, you're going to want to put Termitor in there. So what do you want to do? Remember that 15 minutes of mixing? I think that's a good goal. That way you're homogeneous, first drop, last drop, you're ready to go. Okay, we've mixed up well. We're ready to go. Okay, now we have to calibrate. Because if you're just going out there and applying by feel, I can guarantee you the customer's not getting what they paid for. Chances are you're not putting out the correct amount of material. It's low. Or maybe you're applying too much, and then you're costing your company extra material costs, right? We need to calibrate. We need to know what our rigs are putting out. Now you can see I got a circle around this flow meter. That's a great way to go. And Heritage has flow meters. They're not very expensive. You can put them right there at the termite wand connection, and you can look at them as you're applying. So if you know you're going to put 4 gallons over 10 linear feet, the flow meter says 4 gallons, right? So you're ready to go. That works great. Not everybody has flow meters. So what do we need to do? Well, set up your rig the way you would do most of your treatments. Use the termite rod with the correct diameter that you use for your trench treatments. Put on the tip that you normally like to use, and then go ahead and take all the material out of the hose, no air in the hose, and then you're going to find out how long it takes to put 4 gallons out of that system. And that's what you want to know, okay? So I'm going to fill up this screen. If you want to take a picture of this, please do. But here's the calibration formula, right? And if you want to know your gallons per minute, this is how you can calculate it. If it takes 80 seconds for me to fill up that bucket to 4 gallons, you can do the math and it comes out to 3 gallons per minute. It's nice to know that it's 3 gallons per minute, but the most important number is that 80 seconds. What I need to know as a technician, as a person doing the treatment, is for me to put 4 gallons over 10 feet, I have to treat for 80 seconds. If you do that and you do 80 seconds of treatment for that 1 foot of depth over 10 feet, you put out the right amount of chemistry that customer was told they would get per the label. And if you do that all the way around the structure, you've got a fantastic treatment that is evenly done and correct, right? So you can see why the calibration is really important, but that number is critical. Now, many of you are using Termitor HG, and I'll talk about a little more detail in a second, but it is 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. Well, we can use the same math, and now we know it's 40 seconds, half the time, you're saving half the labor, to put out and treat that same 10 feet with 2 gallons, right? So again, calibration is really, really important. Okay, we mixed right, we calibrate, we know what we're doing. Now we need to know our labels, okay? Here's a great website you can utilize to access labels. I think Heritage has them at their website. We have at ours at bsf.pestcontrol.us. But what I like about this cdms.net, number one, it's free, right? And all the manufacturers put their current container labels and SDSs for their products on this website. And you can just download the PDF and use them, right? So it's a great service, but we need to know these labels. Okay, so pre-treat. So up until when the final grade is established is what is pre-construction treatments. You can see a picture here that we're doing in the Texas Hill Country. And we actually had some turf mark that we use to we can visually see the areas that we're treating, but we also know our calibration, right? And we know it's 1 to 1.5 gallons per 10 square feet. Our trenches, our vertical zones, are 4 gallons per 10 feet per foot of depth. If you use an HE, it's 2 gallons. Many of the labels also say you want to put an extra gallon or so in each of these penetrations, like you see sticking up. And if there was, and it's not in this picture, but if you had hollow block, like it's going to be a crawl or whatever, then you treat inside the hollow block at 2 gallons per 10 linear feet. Post-construction is very similar, right? Post-construction, the structure is already built. For Termitor SC, Termitor WG, and the other products in the industry except HE, it's 4 gallons per 10 linear feet per foot of depth for your trenches. If you're treating that hollow block, it's still 2 gallons per 10. Now, let's say you're down drilling. You're down drilling that back patio or whatever it might be. Even though you're putting holes through the slab, you're still treating at 4 gallons over 10 feet per foot of depth, right? So that's important. Inaccessible crawl space, that's what this IC is referring to. You can broadcast that if it's inaccessible. You do it at 1 to 1.5 per 10 square feet. And then many of the labels, like the Termitor, they'll talk about a bath trap or a shower pan, and bath traps could be 1 to 4 gallons per square foot of opening, that type of thing. So read your labels to know what the volumes will be for your treatments. And then your trench sizes, right? So with Termitor SC, WG, and many of the products out there, it has to be 6 inches deep. Okay, so do the best you can with a pick, get it 6 inches deep. It can be 6 inches wide. That's a really powerful word, right? Because sometimes you have that little bit of slab, maybe an air conditioning pad or whatever, that's pulled away from the foundation. Well, it's not 6 inches away, but it's only like 2. Well, I can take the sharp end of the pick and go 6 inches deep and 2 inches wide, and I could treat that trench. And remember, you have to trench or trench and rod. Rod only is only allowed in extremely specific situations, like a down drill or something is physically obstructing you from trenching. Otherwise, you have to trench or trench and rod. Okay, so let's talk about the down drill, right? So here we are in Mississippi, and we drilled our holes, and we're using SCWG. We're going to be at 12-inch spacings. Okay, think about that. If you're on 12-inch spacings, that means over 10 running feet, you're going to have 10 holes. Okay, if it's 4 gallons per 10 linear feet and I have 10 holes, that means I'm going to put 0.4 divided by 10 gallons per hole. Now, when I started this business in the 80s, I was trained by a person who says, you pump it in that hole until it comes out that hole. Okay, well, many of us are trained that way. Well, sometimes it never comes up that hole, right? And other times it comes up so fast, you didn't get the 0.4 gallons in that you're supposed to. Now, here's the power of that calibration. If we know it takes 80 seconds to put out 4 gallons, and I want 1/10 of that, then it's 0.4 gallons equals 8 seconds, 1/10 of 80 seconds. So now I can just do 1001, 1002, 1003, go to 1008, That's how much volume I put per hole. Now, what if it's a basement and I want to go down to 2 feet? Well, it's 8 seconds for the first foot, 8 seconds for the next foot. If it's 3 feet, another 8 seconds, 4 feet, another 8 seconds, right? So calibration is so powerful for when you're doing your volume treatments. What about HE? Well, if you want to take a picture of this slide, please do. This is the label for HE. I've already mentioned it's 2 gallons over 10 linear feet per foot of depth. So if we half the water, but we double the percentage, go from 0.06 to 0.125, it's the same amount of chemistry to protect the structure. You're just using half the water carrier. It's the same amount of Termitor to protect the structure. And you can do it with a smaller trench. Instead of digging 6 by 6, which is a pretty large amount of soil, you can do a 2 by 4. That's a lot easier on you and your tools and the site. And your down drilling is now 18 inches apart versus 12 as an option. So it's 1/3 less holes to drill, treat, and patch. And when you have those deep foundations, basements, or you're built in the side of the hill and the back side of the house is 6 foot deep, instead of going to 4 foot, as all the other products require, you can go to 2. That's a major savings in time, labor, and even chemistry. So why? Well, it has to do with the formulation itself. We have a proprietary blend of polymers we put in this HE formulation and allows us for better, more even distribution in the soil. Here's some work we did at Purdue a few years back. Look at this HE finished dilution on the left versus SC on the right. And you can see how it penetrates this shelter tube and distributes much more evenly and quickly than SC. And in a very short period of time, it's also going to bind to that soil, bind to those tubes. And even if it gets wet, it's not going to move or leach or anything like that. But we're using the formulation chemistry to help us. Here, I'll show this one more time on another piece. HE on the left, SC on the right. This is the finished dilution you mixed in your tank. Look at that HE right away starting to penetrate and distribute both with depth, but also laterally. And that's why we can have a 2 by 4 trench instead of a 6 by 6. That's why we can use half the water and still get better distribution of the material within that soil profile. So formulation chemistry makes a huge difference. This is the only product available in the industry that has this type of thing. Many of you use the foaming products, Termitor foam in a can. Thank you for that. Fantastic product. Heritage has it for you too. The nice thing about this can is it will do a 30-to-1 very dry foam, like shaving cream for those of us that shave, right? And when you treat a wall void, it's so dry, no water comes out on the floor. Some of the competitive products out there will put some water on the floor, and that's not good, right? It can stain the carpet or be available to a pet or something like that. Now, what are we trying to do? Well, that little can there will fill up a 5-gallon bucket. That gives you a good visual. But we don't treat 5-gallon buckets, right? We treat walls. And if you look at 16 on center studs, that will treat a wall void that's 2 feet high. Okay, so that gives you another good visual as to what's happening. Now, I'm going to start this video, and I really like this HD video, right? So you can see here, we got the carton nest here, and you're going to see it move in the upper left. What's happening, I'm taking the tip of this Termitor foam in a can and put it right there at the top, and I'm going to push down the actuator, and I'm going to let the foam start to come through here. Now, this is carton nest. These are Formosan termites. If you haven't seen Formosans before, that's what they look like. Got these little rounded heads on the soldiers, right? But watch what happened. Here comes the foam. So what's happening is the foam is carrying the active ingredient, and everything the foam touches, it treats. Yeah, we're treating termites, right? But a lot of times you don't know if the termites are in there or not because you can't see inside the wall void, but you're treating the back of the sheetrock, you're treating the back of the insulation, you're treating around the pipes, you're treating around the cables, you're treating around everything it touches, the studs itself, the sill plate. And then as this foam dissipates, it leaves the active ingredient, leaves the Termitor there. Look at that soldier just biting that foam. That's pretty neat. And it gives you some residual over time, right? But this is what a lot of times you can't see where you're actually foaming, right? So I like to show this video so you get a feel for how you're doing this treatment. Excuse me. Okay, I'm a scientist, right? So I'll show you some data. When you take this Termitor foam and you do these carpenter ants here, look at this, within 24 hours, we're only getting about 20-25% control. What's good about that, they've all been exposed, right? But they haven't quite died, but they're doing the normal behaviors and they're transferring it to others. And then look what happens when you get to that 1, 2, 3, 7, and 14 days. Kicks right in. Now, we've all heard about Formosan termites, and can be difficult to control in many aspects, but we get the treatments to them, we kill them, right? Again, 1 to 2 hours, they're doing all their normal behaviors. Look what happens within 4 to 8 hours post that treatment. Remember I said it doesn't take 3 months, it just takes hours to get to this control and stop the damage, and you can see that in the data too. So the labels don't require us to use things like termite rods or tips or anything like that, right? But we use them because we as professionals, it helps us get the material where it's supposed to be in the correct way, right? Now, this is what I like to use. I like to use the largest termite rod diameter I have for doing the outside treatments. That way I'm pushing into the soil, I have less chance of bending it and all that. I like to use a 180-degree tip, and Heritage has all these tips and rods, right? And the 180-degree tip goes toward the structure. So if I do lift it above the trench, I'm not using a 360 and shooting myself in the boot or something like that. And they even make a 20-degree down angle, which is pretty neat. So 180 degrees in front of you, 20 degrees down. That's a really good tip to use in your trenches. The 360, all the way around, I like those, especially when I down drill and I want to maximize my horizontal coverage. I think that's really good. Sometimes like dirt-filled porches and that, I want to get more penetration with depth, and that's what I might use this single board beveled tip. I always use a tip because if you don't, you'll mess up the threads on the end of these rods, and then you can't use a tip. And you'll notice there's some, excuse me, other really kind of neat tips here. And these are used for like wall voids, get behind sheetrock and different things like that. Excuse me. And then this top rod here, this is a sub-slab injector. You can use that seal to actually seal your concrete drilled holes as you do your sub-slab application. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to have a system, right? And the system has to be based upon the labels. I've been, talking about some of the label rates and that type of thing. So here's SCWG, 4 gallons, 10 linear feet per foot of tip, a 6x6 trench, 12-inch spacing on your holes or less, 4 foot deep on deep foundations. But HE, it's a true 2x4. That's a great visual, right? 2x4 for your trench, half the volume, so it's half the labor time to fill your tank, pump it out, everything else. And then you can do 18-inch hole spacing. Now, that's a lot less holes to drill, treat, and patch. Think about those cases we have like a patio, and you have like a 16-inch centers on tile. Well, now I can go to 16-inch centers and use the tile for where I do my drilling. So really, really critical aspects. And 2 feet of depth instead of 4 on the deep foundations. Okay, so let's take a situation and let's take these labels and see what that means, right? And remember how I talked about using a system. Well, when I started in the 80s, we did what we called quote unquote full conventional treatments, right? And if we take WG or SC and I treat this crawl space and I do everything the label allows me to treat. Now, let's say there's no activity here. This is pure preventative, okay? I'm going to treat the outside of the foundation wall, inside the foundation wall. This is hollow block. I'm going to treat inside the hollow block. I'm going to treat around each of the piers because I can get inside this crawl space. And these piers are hollow, so I'm going to treat inside the hollow piers, right? If you do the math with SC or WG and add all that up, we're coming out to about 510 gallons. This would be on 2 feet of depth, okay? So, yeah, that's a lot of material, right? Okay, what happens if I'm going to do what's called the exterior perimeter localized interior treatment, which we generated the data to show this works very well, and people have been doing this since 2004, right? And I mean, pest professionals, right? And this is where you do the outside perimeter and then perimeter around the piers, and you treat anywhere else where there's activity. That's the localized interior part, the LI. Well, there's no activity here, so I'm going to focus on outside perimeter and out around the piers. Now, it's 184 for the outside and 96 for the piers. That's a lot less, right? We're talking 280 gallons versus 510. What about HE, right? Well, HE, we can treat everything per the label, okay? But remember, our trenches now, it's 2 gallons per 10 feet per foot of depth, right? So it's 92 for the outside, inside, and when you add all this up, we're at 281 for everything. But you see where I'm going. What about exterior perimeter localized interior using HE? Well, no activity, so there's no LI to speak of. So we're going to focus on the exterior perimeter around the piers. Now it's 140 gallons. And yet we still see with the data less than 1% retreatment rates with these type of treatments. So you have a lot of options here. All of them are fine, right? But follow your labels, follow your minimum standards of your states, and this is great options for you. Okay, I've been talking about a system, right? So for the liquid treatments, the labels don't teach you a system, but I've already kind of told you how I do it. What I do is I've calculated per my linear footage how much material I need. I mix up the correct amount, and then I go out and I do each 10-foot section at a time. So I'm a golfer. I'm a bad golfer, but I can step off 10 feet, right? And then I make a little dam at the end, and I'm going to treat that 10-foot correctly. So if I'm using HE and it takes me 40 seconds to treat 10 foot, I'm going to put probably 20 to 30 seconds in, and I'm going to kick the soil back in as I'm going. I'm using my rod, and I'm going to put the rest of that 2 gallons in over that 10 feet for that 40 seconds. And by the time I'm done with that 10 feet, I go to the next 10 feet and do the same thing. Next 10 feet and do the same thing. And I finish that process around the entire structure. When I'm done, I did it evenly, and I got the right amount of material out there per the label and as to what the customer purchased, right? So that's a system I use. If you got a better one, go for it, right? But if that helps, you're certainly welcome to, utilize, my experience there. Okay, let's talk about the baits a little bit. Fantastic opportunities. Heritage Landscape Supply has the Trelona system available for you. Some of you are using the Centricon that's out there too. And let's talk about those, right? So the nice thing about these is, they can be used for both pre as well as post-construction treatments. Now, Arizona has some special rules there, so follow your state minimum standards too. But for pre-construction treatments, and even post-construction, you don't have to prove there's termites there. It can be preventative treatments, and where it is, except for Arizona, basically it's proven in the other states, right? You can do it in lieu of a liquid treatment, right? It can be your pre-construction treatment as a standalone approach. But a lot of termite baiting is used post-construction, right? So the structure's already built. And again, if there's termites there, great, but does not have to be termites there. Just like you can do a liquid treatment without proving there's termites there, because preventatives are fantastic, because why wait for the damage to happen in the first place, right? But if you have termites going, yeah, we're going to get them there. Like I have the Trelona station here right next to these tubes, right? Okay, so we're going to follow our label directions. We're going to, let me go back here. Okay, I'm not sure why that little thing popped up, but we'll see if it goes away here in a second. So look at your structure, look at your active areas. You want to have your diagram, your linear footage, everything else, and you're going to follow those label directions for your installations, right? And what you're trying to do is, you're going to have a perimeter approach to this, right? And that's a good thing. And let's see if I get this thing going. There we go. And yeah, you're going to put proper spacing, right? Now with Trelona, it's 20 foot or less as you go around the structure. Now, please don't walk every 20 feet and drop a piece of plastic. That's not the point, right? You want to use that spacing as your guideline within that 20 feet, but then you position your stations as close to certainly activity, certainly damage, and conducive conditions, so you can maximize the potential for the termites to get in your stations. They start feeding and you can get to control. Notice how very powerful with these systems, we can go around patios, we can go around the pools, that type of thing. So you get some really good opportunity to intercept those termites as they're foraging. I'm showing you here some of the tools I use for the installation. I like to use this power auger, using this echo drill. I do a lot of holes. I have this manual auger I use when it's just a couple of holes, right? But when you're doing, 15, 20 holes per account, and you're putting them in the first time, an echo drill with a reverse really helps. And this is the bit I like to use, and Heritage Landscape Supply can help you with it. There's a catalog here link you can also look at. And these tips and these chuck inserts can even be replaced over time. So that fluting and that long shaft, that'll last you forever, basically, with these tools. I like to have a good long screwdriver or probe, so I can probe the soil first, and look for things like sprinkler system lines or whatever might be under there, so I don't hit those with the auger bit before I make the hole in the ground. And then, of course, you have your diagram and everything else. And I'll talk about these other tools here in a second. So here's a very simple diagram, right? Here's the structure. I like to say have a system when you put in this. And like if you're right-handed, maybe you go to the front door and station number 1 is to your right, and you keep going around. Or let's say there's a fence here on the left side and on the right side, but the gate is only on the right. Well, maybe I'll walk in the backyard and put station number 1 way over here to the back side of this fence with no gate, and then work my way all the way around to the front, right? So I have a system and have it in place. And then when you put your stations in the ground, use your spacing, use conducive conditions, but just before you make that hole in the ground, look up and look at the structure and say, okay, if I move over 3 inches, I can be off the edge of the windowsill. Why do I do that kind of stuff? Because if I have to come back and find a buried station, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the structure and say, what would I have lined it up with that really helps me with probing the soil to find that lost station? Be very frustrated to find a lost station, right? If you don't have those kind of clues. So like I said, 20 foot or less with the Chelona label, but again, we're going to use conducive conditions, right? And look at these arrows here. Like I have this air conditioning unit at this site. There's a lot of condensation coming down and the air conditioning is being used throughout the year. This is in Texas. It basically runs year round. We're going to have moisture in that soil. Here's a downspout. I put the station on the side where I use the moisture as a conducive area, but I don't have the flooding of a downspout going through it. Wood to soil contact here, put a station close to that. Termites love edges. They'll follow this landscaping edge. You can put it in the mulch bed or outside. Either way is fine. Look for sprinkler systems. There was one here, so made sure I didn't impact that. And you can take like a little crayon, like a concrete crayon, and make little marks on the foundation. Only you know would be there to look for to line up where your station is. Notice the driveway, right? So we have some wording on here, very powerful wording, that instead of 20 feet, we can go, 30 feet or so. And it's advisable, if it's more than that, to maybe core a hole here and put in a cord opportunity to put a station here. But this is where you can work with Termidor, right? You can put a station here and a station way on the other side, if it's like 40 feet away, let's say, and then maybe use Termidor to treat these columns, just pop a couple holes and treat that area. If it's only, a lot of these single garages like this is like 24, 25 feet. Well, that's less than 30. Just go ahead and jump it, right? You can do that with your station placement. Okay, notice this is a site in San Antonio we were treating, and it's a little fuzzy, but there's termites coming up and down here. You can see the shelter tube. I put a station there as close as I can because I want termites in there as soon as I can, because I want them feeding upon that bait so we can get to colony elimination status as soon as possible. Right? So we augered a hole and then, put that in there and get a really good seal with the top of that station to the soil. So less moving air is moving in as possible because they don't like moving air, right? That makes it less conducive. So get a really good seal. And again, use that station placement around the structure per the label, but use conducive conditions, get them as close to activity as you can, keep them out of the drip line so water doesn't run through them all the time. And then we're going to go back and check these over time. So how does this work, right? And so what's happening is termites have to find the station. Then they have to start feeding on the cartridges. They feed on the cellulose. And inside the cellulose, we have our active ingredient called levaluron. And levaluron then will be transferred by the workers within the colony as they do their trophallaxis and they eat dead ones that got levaluron in them and that type of thing. It gets transferred. Well, the workers are the immatures. Well, the immatures are going to molt. And when they molt, they use a very special protein called chitin to create their exoskeleton, right? Well, what does novaluron do? Novaluron inhibits the creation or the synthesis of chitin. So if it's in their system and they molt, they don't molt correctly. This is a great looking molt. They're very healthy. Things are looking good. But when levaluron's in their system, this is how they come out. Most of the time, they're dead. If they're not dead, they can't do their normal behaviors. Other termites eat them. They pick up that levaluron again, and then it leads to more impact. So what happens then is the worker class gets hammered. They're gone. They can't feed and take care of the reproductives. They can't take care of the eggs, and the soldiers have nobody to take care of them, and the colony collapses. But we got to get there, and we have to start by getting those termites in that station. That's why I say if you can get the station as close as possible, please do, and keep it as conducive as possible to get them in there to get this process going. Here's a really neat video from University with Dr. Ping Hu and Richard Murphy. And you can see him, we took a little Nile Blue A dye, we put it to the cartridge so you could see him moving it. And they're taking this, these workers are taking it back into the colony where they're going to then ingest it, convert it into glucose, and then transfer it. But as they do that, they're transferring the novaluron. And you can see there's even blue dots throughout the gallery as they're breaking up that cartridge and putting it in different places. So we're using their behavior again to get that bait back into the colony. That's what it looks like when they have an improper molt, and that one can get munched down by the termites, and that just keeps transferring the material within the colony. Okay, number 9, servicing the bait systems, right? So you put them in, you got them installed, you're going to come back, okay? So you show up, you got all your tools, you're going to visit the occupants and tell them, you know, ask them what they've seen, tell them what your goals are that day. Then you're going to do your site inspection. I inspect you do a pre-walk real quick just to make sure that all the gates are open, there's no Rottweilers in the backyard, haven't been fed in 2 weeks, all that kind of stuff, right? Get back there, and then you can get your tools and get ready to do your station inspections. Now, Trelona annual means you can go back once per year as your minimum. You can always go back more than that, right? To be Trelona annual, you have to have 2 Trelona bait cartridges in every station on property. If you do that, you can go back once per year. If you do anything else besides that, then you have to go back 3 times per year to check the stations, right? So that's the easy way to think about that. If you want to do the annual, fantastic approach. Just have 2 cartridges in every station on property. Use that diagram. And as you go back over time, you know, people put in new additions, new landscaping, they put in a new pool, right? You're going to edit your diagrams and make them more current. And you may have to put in more stations or move stations or move things around. And then again, use those AC units, the edges of the windowsills, hose bibs, trees, stumps, landscaping. Use all those markers to help you locate where those stations are. So when you go back to find them, you can easily find them, right? Now, if you want to take a picture of this slide, please do. This is my inspection kit, right? So I got my diagram, I got my label, I got my tote I carry everything in. This spider tool is fantastic to use for opening these stations for Trelona. The lid stays in the spider tool, makes it very efficient. I mean, they're not, you know, locked, but if you don't have the tool, it's harder to get into it, and it keeps, you know, the kids and everybody out of it too. I use a cotter pin puller to lift these cartridges out of the station. I'll show you that. And I use this very special tool here that I get at that French store called Target, which would be Target for some of us, right? But that's a melon baller, but it's a little longer one. It's made by EKO. And it's a stronger pot metal, so it lasts longer. So what do I do with it? Well, as you lift these cartridges out of that station, soil sometimes falls back in there, and then they won't fit when you put them back in. I use this little melon ball as a shovel, and I can get that out there quite easily. It's an easy tool to carry. Sometimes that little brush helps me just to clean the lid off, or I put the lid back on, clean the top. Sometimes nail claw helps. I do wear this. I use the kneel pad. If you have knee pads, that's great, but I'm on my knees a lot. I'm gathering data. I'm doing stuff, right? But I do protect myself when I'm working these stations. I carry some extra cartridges that need to be replaced. I have a screwdriver to be probing and looking for the stations, that type of thing. Actually, I like to use a paint pen for numbering the stations on the lower side here. And I carry some extra lids and maybe an extra station in the truck. I do bring some ant bait because if there's ants associated with these stations, I'm going to put out ant bait to knock them out, because less ants in the station, better chance termites are going to be in there, right? We want them to feed. So that's what it looks like, and you put it all together. Go ahead and do my service, do my inspection, and go ahead and gather the data and share that with the customer. So here I've used this cotter pin puller. That's that other tool I talked about to hook the top of this cartridge and bring it out. You can get these at Home Depot or whatever. These are great tools. And look, you can look inside each of these cartridges and look for termite mud, look for shelter material. You can see it's translucent. Many times you can see termites in there as they're feeding, and you're going to look for activity. Now, one question you're going to ask me, when do you replace the cartridge? You only replace the cartridges if 1/3 or more of that cellulose is gone. Don't replace it because it's 2 years old or 3 years old. This stuff lasts many years. In fact, we have brand new data from A&M University that shows 5-year-old stuff works as good as fresh out of the box, and there's zero drop off, right? So it's going to go many years beyond that too. So just replace them based upon feeding. What about fungus or mold? Hey, they love fungus and mold. Just go ahead and leave them in there. And we have this wonderful best practices for a replacement guide that we can get to you. Just send me an email. I'll be happy to send it to you. Heritage can help us with that too. But again, it's the 1/3 rule. Don't worry about age. Don't worry about fungus or mold. They like fungus and mold. Okay. Here's that data. If you want to take a picture of that, this is the data I did with Texas A&M University. We took aged cartridges that were aged in the field in Galveston, Texas, talking about a really tough environment. And the 5-year-old stuff worked as good as fresh out of the box and everything in between. So I don't expect any drop off whatsoever for many years post these cartridges being in the ground. That'll help your cost of goods, right? You're not replacing. Okay, last one, post-treatment inspections. Critical. You have to go back, let's say you're going back once a year. That's fine. You can do it with Chelona annual, your liquid treatments, maybe a combination. If you want to go back twice a year, whatever, that's fantastic too. It's just more service. Nothing wrong with that, right? But certainly, these are critical because your customers always change things. They put in new additions, new landscaping, a new pool. They move your stations. They bury your stations. The dog dug up a bunch of your treated soil, so you're going to have to replace that soil, right? So work with your customer on these inspections. Be very thorough. Moisture meters are fantastic. Here's some breakout holes from a formosan treatment this was actually for an install. We did the treatment on the front end, right? Check trees if you're in formosan areas. That's really important too. Okay. You want to probe, you want to look for damage, and certainly look at your diagrams and your history so you check those areas that were active in the past really, really closely. Update your diagrams if they need to be updated. Maybe a new addition, a new pool, new landscape, whatever it might be. If you find other wood destroying, maybe some beetles came in on some new furniture or whatever, you do an inside treatment or inspection. Let's go ahead and share that with the customer. You can get some service taken care of there. But you're really looking for how they impact your treatments. Maybe I've seen landscape companies that took out our bait stations. I've seen where they put in our soil was there and now it's gone. Maybe there was a 5-inch rain, the guttering system wasn't working, it was plugged, and it washed away 6 feet of your treated soil. Okay, let's go ahead and get that taken care of, right? Work with your customer on that. Share with them. Take your inspection is so important that you share the results with them, and you should have some IPM information in there as to how the property owner can help you, right? Fix that spigot that seems to be dripping all the time. Fix that that leaking system on the inside, plumbing penetration, it might be. Wood to soil contacts you point out. Let's get them to know about that. Initially, you shared it with them, and then, let them take care of it. Maybe they hire you to take care of it. That's what you do. There's nothing wrong with that also. And then whatever guarantee, warranty, you would share that with them too. Follow your state regs wherever appropriate. Quality work. We want to do quality work, do a fantastic job, take care of the folks. There's our top 10 again. We're going to be right here at the end. I'm going to do a couple of questions and we'll be done. But hopefully that top 10 helped. And remember, your goal is to protect the structure. We can use these tools, liquids, baits, we can use combinations together, and we can really provide some fantastic treatments for our customers. Okay, question 1. Which of the following is not a correct label application? SC at 4 gallons per 10 per foot of depth, HE at 2 gallons per 10, terminal SC at 2 gallons per 10, or HE at 4 gallons? Well, the answer is D is not correct. And you might have thought it was at terminal SC at 2 gallons, but we can do that in the hollow block, right? Which of the following is a correct application rate for a vertical treatment? That'd be the trench along a foundational wall for SC. Well, yeah, it's going to be that 4 gallons per 10 feet per foot of depth. What's that minimum trench size for Termitor SC? right? Maybe it was 6, but it's not just dig till you hit bottom. The minimum, right? The minimum is at 6x6. Remember, you can be 6 inches wide though. How about HE? Well, that's a huge difference in these labels, right? So now it's actually a 2x4. So fantastic tool there. How about your maximum hole spacing when you're down drilling for SC? Well, it's 12 inches, right? 12 inches apart. But for HE, it would be 18. Okay, happiness is we're done. I'm going to go back to the front. There's my contact information again, my email, my phone number, Richard's also. If we can be of service, please reach out. And I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Heritage. And thank you again once time for Heritage and also for everybody else out there today. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.